The latest cinematic rendition of an IP with a turbulent history of adaptations, Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves thankfully avoids plummeting to the dark, dingy depths of certain prior installments, being a nice surprise in that it provided a fun, chaotic ride, which, while certainly saddled with its fair share of setbacks, is nonetheless an overall positive experience. One of my chief concerns going in was the tone, and despite sometimes feeling like a farcical parody of Lord of the Rings, the employment of humour here manages not to completely destroy the film, with bathos being present in only small doses that I could stomach, as opposed to being direly destructive in cases such as Star Wars The Last Jedi, or perhaps most famously as of late, the dreaded Marvel humour curse which utterly annihilated the likes of Thor Love and Thunder, which I definitely have a full video talking about, which you can see in the description below. Make no mistake, this is an extremely light-hearted romp and should be classed as an action comedy in my eyes, being packed with one-liners and quips, and if this sounds like something you take issue with, you will not enjoy this, but in my view it manages to crack jokes without making a mockery of itself, which is one of the main points against the so-called Marvel humour. That sort of sneering, degrading comedy that mocks the stakes and world that they simultaneously want you to be invested in, and at times straight up mocks you, the viewer, for having said investment in the first place. That isn't really present here, instead being more of a tonally and narratively light exhibition that mostly stays consistent with what is meant to be funny and what is meant to be taken more seriously. It pokes fun at itself and the IP it's adapting, but in a wholesome way, making the audience feel like they're in on the joke and not at its expense. It laughs with the fans rather than at them. I'm also very happy to report there is no overt political bias or a penchant for including, as the critical drinker on YouTube would say,
the message.
Despite the brain-numbingly moronic comments from the creators about how much they love to emasculate their leading men. Seriously, the bumbling imbeciles that stated as such should be fired, or at least thoroughly scolded and explicitly told not to do so again, as it completely and needlessly stirred fans, myself and many others apprehensive of such things, up into believing this was going to be a pathetically pandering train wreck of cringe, when in fact there was basically nothing like that present at all. The female characters are strong, both physically and mentally, and are capable of engaging men on both fronts and coming out ahead. Yet, said characters are not obnoxious or degrading towards their male compatriots, and form both platonic and romantic connections with them in a non-toxic manner. Characters which would definitely have been mishandled in other movies and by other studios, Disney, are employed well in Dungeons & Dragons. Thank fuck for that. As for the main aspects of the film we haven't covered so far, let's start with the performances. They're mostly just fine. Chris Pine shines as a strong and engaging leading man with a talent for both comic and more sincerely mature delivery. And Michelle Rodriguez gives the best performance I've seen from her, which, to be fair, isn't saying too much in my case, since the only other role I remember her from is in Fast and Furious, and, well, yeah. The rest of the main cast, including Regé-Jean Page, Justice Smith, Sophia Lillis, Daisy Head, and Hugh Grant, were all just fine. Grant played much the same role as he did in Paddington 2, with many such comparisons having already been made, but ramped up to 11, and he managed fine. The others each added to the film in their own ways. The characters themselves are all pretty one-note, with some shticks clicking with me more than others, but none of them are truly off-putting or exceptionally annoying. I would much rather have seen certain factions like the Red Wizards and the Harkons see more development, particularly the villains, which I thought were fairly weak. The plot has several storylines which run parallel, and I won't go too deeply into them to avoid spoilers, but essentially we have the group on their overarching quest, with each member having their own personal goals and tribulations they must overcome to achieve them, in tandem with their main objective. In some sense, it really resembles the setup of an actual session of D&D. As I mentioned, the characters are quite one-note and are really defined by their quote-unquote character sheets, which in this case relate more to their individual goal they want to accomplish and their failing they want to overcome. This isn't done terribly and is uniquely fitting given the setting, but it certainly doesn't break any new ground. The world building is similar, being a relatively generic and cliché fantasy realm for me. The props and weapons are passable, but often felt like cosplay pieces and wall hangers. That goes for the armor as well. The locations are very formulaic and sometimes look a bit cheap. There's a castle scene in particular that genuinely looks like the actors are just chilling in a publicly accessible National Trust castle, and the CGI is fine. Much better than the trailers made it look, but never above average for me. It was used in some creative sequences though. It's all just okay. Not bad, but not amazing. The creatures that the series is famed for do feature, just not really that predominantly save for a couple, and never in a super interesting manner. They're just for a spectacle, really. The camera work, lighting, editing, etc. all have their odd moments here and there, but mostly just fall into the decent but not great category. Far better than rancid turds like Thor Love and Thunder or Ant-Man 3, but nothing outstanding. I feel like this sums up the film, and in my opinion, the overly positive reception it's been getting is because it's just better than most of the bilge we've seen shut out onto our screens recently, at least when it comes to films of this sort. And it does the fun, light-hearted adventure in a way that's actually fun and not a thinly veiled political mouthpiece or a horrifyingly unfunny flop. I'm not saying the film doesn't deserve praise or that you shouldn't support it, I think you should, but I think it's overrated, and that's my thoughts as to why. It's certainly not bad, but it's really far from a masterpiece. I would recommend Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves as an enjoyable outing, some genuine escapism in a time where it's needed more than ever. I think it will entertain both fans of the series and complete newcomers, and that despite my problems with it, the movie deserves the reward of a favourable reception and charitable reviews that it's been laden with.
Fucking donkey!